All right, welcome back. We're going to continue on our discussion of Christology and talking about the humanity of Christ. One of the major issues in theology in talking about Jesus' humanity is this idea of impeccability. The word here, impeccability, is talking about Jesus' sinlessness. And the real question, not is Jesus sinless, although we'll prove that here in a couple of verses. The question really is, could Jesus have sinned? Was it possible for Jesus to sin in this life? And if that's the case, what was his temptation truly legitimate? So let's look at the evidence here. First of all, was Jesus sinless? Obviously he was. Hebrews 4:15. We do not have a high priest that is unable to sympathize with our weakness, but one who is in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Right there, Hebrews 4:15, Jesus Christ was without sin. 2 Corinthians 5, for our sake he made him who knew no sin, or made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Jesus Christ knew no sin. It's not just simply that in the crucifixion that Jesus was innocent of the charges, but rather Jesus was completely innocent of all sin. He never once sinned. He resisted temptation in the wilderness, whereas we see Adam sinned in the garden. Of course, Paul uses that juxtaposition of Adam's sin, allowing sin into the world, allowing death into the world, that life and that justification and resurrection can come through the one man's obedience, the one man's true holiness, Jesus Christ, there in Romans chapter 5. So we see here when Jesus was tempted in the wilderness, we see he did not sin. And so in no way, shape, or form, so the Bible makes very clear that Jesus never sinned. Clearly affirms this. Jesus never actually sinned as a child or as an adult. No sin is ever recorded from Jesus, for Jesus, and the Bible does not condemn him for anything. It clearly affirms that Jesus was tempted, though, and that those temptations were real. So, question, how is it that those temptations were real? Could Jesus have sinned? Is it possible for Jesus to have sinned? Let's consider this. We also see that he was clearly tempted. God cannot be tempted with evil. And so obviously his deity could not be tempted. So in his humanity, could he have sinned? So ultimately this question is not whether or not God could have sinned. Obviously he could not have. God cannot be tempted with sin. Whatever God chooses to do is therefore righteous and holy, and is always in conformity with his character. So it's impossible for God to sin. So Jesus, as God, could not have sinned. But the question then, could his humanity have sinned? Could his human nature have fallen to temptation? This, again, is a paradox, much like what's called the hypostatic union, the union of Jesus, the man, Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, the Son of God. So the question is this paradox is maybe is solved this way. If Jesus' human nature had existed alone, it would have been free from sin, but possibly able to sin. His human nature was free from the stain of sin. He was free from inherited sin. Remember the last video we talked about his virgin birth, or the first video we talked about his virgin birth, making sure because he was virgin born, he did not have the sin of his father passed to him. As we looked at with anthropology, sin is passed down through the father. Because Adam sinned, he was a man. As the father, he passed sin on to his children, onto his sons. Jesus had no earthly father, so therefore had no sin nature. He had no inherited sin. He had no inherited guilt, because he was son of a woman, because he was son of Mary, but not of Joseph. So his human nature would have been free from sin and would have been able to sin. However, because his human nature never existed apart from the union with his divine nature, then that's kind of a moot point. We don't ever see a point in which he could have been tempted with sin because he was always the Son of God. Although Jesus suffered from some things in his human nature, thirst and such, an act of sin would have involved his whole person as a moral act. You cannot sin apart from that sin corruption or that sin corrupting. If Jesus had sinned, then he would have ceased to be God. That's not just a paradox. That is a contradiction. That's an impossibility. God cannot sin. God is not tempted with sin. God is holy. So therefore, if he had sinned, he would have ceased to be God. Therefore, that's impossible. So take it as it will, then that seems to mean that it is impossible for Jesus to have sinned. Now, as we conclude this video, we do need to understand that Jesus was tempted in all ways we were. In other words, he suffered the temptation as his human soul, as his human nature was tempted, just as he was in the garden sweating droplets of blood. He really did want to be rescued. He really did want the cup to pass from him because his human nature did not want to die. So we do see that the temptation was real, but yet it was not ever possible, nor would it have been possible for Jesus to have sinned. All right. That's all we have for this video. I'll see you on the next.